great to have a couple of disaster preparedness folks, people who do this work as part of their regular all-day jobs and along with everything else that they do. We have Ray Turan from Viejas, who's going to talk about some of Viejas's emergency management stuff. He's the resource management director and knows all the things. And then we have Teresa Greger with the Intertribal Long-Term Recovery Foundation and also a professor at Cal State Long Beach. So I'm going to let you two, actually in our slides, who's first in the slides? Oh, Ray doesn't have slides. Okay, so we're going to let Ray, the slideless wonder, go first. So, yay, Ray, take it away.
The slideless wonder. Oh my gosh. That's great. I'm going to use that on my resume. Okay, am I on?
You're on.
Okay, very good. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background about our development of our emergency operations plan and how we came to that. A little bit about how we implemented that. I'm also going to give you a little bit about my background. And I'm going to ask a question here. How many of you have spent more than 12 hours in an emergency operations center? Okay. How many of you been in more than 3 emergency operations centers? All right. I have been involved in 6 emergency operations centers. 2 in Arizona for floods, 2 in California, both of them for wildfires. 1 in South Bay on a tsunami emergency operations center, and then 1 during COVID where I spent from March the 20th to August the 18th coming to the emergency operations center every single day during 5 months. So if anybody knows a little bit about emergency operations center, I think I do. A little bit of my background. I've been involved in emergency operations for 48 years. So I'm just barely over 40 right now. So I actually had 40 years before I was born. In that time frame, the one thing that I found in all of those years of dealing with emergency operations is that as good as a plan you have, it all goes out the window as soon as the emergency happens. You can do all your planning, you can do all your training, you can do all those things, but as soon as the emergency happens, a lot of that goes out the window. Now, if you've done a good job of training your people, a lot of that comes back as muscle memory. They'll be able to come into the emergency operations center and really man it and staff it the way it should be staffed. Okay. Viejas Emergency Operation Plan. Our emergency operations plan is based on our hazardous mitigation plan, where we've heard this mentioned several times today. That's the beginning part of your planning. Then we did a THERA, or a Threat Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment. You need to have one of those in order to get any of the FEMA grant funding available to you. And then last, our emergency operations plan was developed. Those 3 plans took about 8 years to get done. So it's a long process. But now, after having gone through that process, our emergency operations plan has been activated twice. Once for a wildfire that was right next to the reservation, and the second time during the COVID. Really, that was kind of a hybrid of emergency operations center. Really didn't have people manning all 5 of the positions there. So in the process of getting our emergency operations plan into action, I have 17 emergency managers that will respond to the emergency operations center when we activate it. Each one of them have been trained in the 5 primary roles in the emergency operations center. 5 primary roles are 1, management, 2, finance, 3, planning, 4, logistics, and 5, operations. Every one of my 17 managers will be able to show up to the Emergency Operations Center and take one of those roles on. And that is from doing constant training with them, constant scenarios with them. When we activate the Emergency Operations Center, I want to feel that if I'm out of country, that we have people that will man or staff the Emergency Operations Center in a way that would protect the community. Okay, I'm going to give you a fact of life in Emergency Operations Center. I know all the planning we've done and everything and things we've talked about here. There are two roles that all first responders have. Can anybody tell me what those two roles are? Save life and protect property. That is their number one activity. When we activated the Emergency Operations Center for a fire that was close to Viejas, we had the cultural resources map there. And we were afraid that the fire was going to spread onto the reservation. Luckily, it didn't. It was blown away from the reservation. But we were ready to be able to let the firefighters and the first responders know where our cultural resources were to be able to protect them. I went to at that time, the Sheriff's Department was the incident commander for that. Went to the incident commander and said, this is where our emergency, this is where all of our cultural resources are. We want to protect those as much as we can. And you know what that sheriff told me? I have two roles: protect life, protect property. If we can prevent from disturbing your cultural resources, we will. But if I have to save somebody's life or if I have to save property, I'm not going to be concerned about the cultural resources. Now, these are the first responders. That's their primary rule in life. So you need to remember that when you're doing an emergency operations center, if you have to get involved with one, those folks have two roles in life. And if they're going to save somebody's life and they have to take a bulldozer through something that happens to be a cultural resource, they're going to do it. And trust me, as much as you're going to sit there and fight them, they're not going to listen to you because they have two roles in life. So that's one little tidbit to keep in mind, that if you do get involved in Emergency Operations Center, those first responders save life, save property. That's what they're there for. So as much as we try to do all the training, whatever, when we had our Emergency Operations Center for the fire that happened close to Viejas, it happened during the day, so I had a lot of staff members that showed up at the Emergency Operations Center. But in our after-action report, we started doing a scenario where none of those people were available or the fire happened in after hours when everybody had already gone home. We would have had 3 people respond to Emergency Operations Center. Luckily, the fire didn't spread to Viejas because we'd have been woefully understaffed to be able to deal with that. It went in the other direction, but really, you have to practice your emergency operations plan with people there during the day. As Shasta mentioned, during the day, during 40 hours, I got a lot of people here. After 40 hours, they're all going home. Now, also in our after-action report, we went and analyzed the 3 people that we had there. How many of them would have really been able to stay there the whole time during the emergency? 2 of them. The other one had a family in El Cajon, and they said, I'm taking care of my family. You guys can deal with this on your own. So when you're practicing your emergency operations plan, you have to look for the scenarios where you cannot depend on having everybody there that you've trained to be there. We're all human beings. The first people we're going to start trying to protect are the ones that we love. And for those of us that have our family properly trained at home, we can feel that we can not take that obligation and provide our obligation to the tribe. One of the other things that I'm also the CERT trainer. I've trained a staff of tribal members at Viejas to be CERT members. And one of the things that we tell every CERT member is that make sure your family is prepared. Because if your family's not prepared, you're not going to be any use to me because you're going to be taking care of your family. So it's very important that CERT members have their families adequately prepared so that they can come and make their obligation to the tribe to be able to help as many people as they can. Now, CERT training is a week-long training that I do. It's pretty gruesome. It will tell you the realities of emergencies. And I can tell you one of the realities is if you have somebody having a heart attack, they're going to die. That's the bottom line. Because in most emergencies, you're not going to have emergency responders to be able to come in and to transport that person to the hospital. And certainly a CERT member is not going to be able to do CPR for 3 hours, for 30 minutes, maybe for 3 minutes, because CPR is a pretty intense physical activity. So during that CERT training, they actually train you to recognize whether that person's going to be a survivor or is not going to be a survivor. That's the reality of emergency.
Why did we invite you?
Well, in there it says the realities of success and maybe failures here. Maybe that's one of the failures I have, but one of the things I always like to do is I like to tell people the way it is, because I've been there 6 times. And I can tell you that when the stuff hits the fan, everything goes out the window. You try to do the best that you can with what you have, save as many people as you can, but you can't save them all. Bottom line. Okay, questions? Sir? I can tell you how they perceive it, how a Westerner would perceive property. That's how they will perceive it. They're not going to look at cultural property. They're not going to look at anything like that. They're going to look at if that house can be saved by getting a piece of equipment there and bulldozing around that house. They're going to bulldoze around that house.
So you mean like a house, a building?
A building, yeah, a building. Pardon? Yeah. I know what you're saying, but I'm giving you the perspective of those first responders, and they're going to try to save people's lives, and they're going to try to save property. That's what their role is.
That a little bit. I think, so working on the federal response side and the state response side, what they're looking at is critical infrastructure, critical utilities, infrastructure, residential infrastructure, like essentially the things that maintain like life-saving, life-sustaining operations. So the backhoe would not necessarily be considered, if you're comparing it from an emergency manager's perspective, they're going to look at the residential structure over that really expensive piece of equipment that is probably your life sustainment. Like, so they're thinking shelter over the thing that you care most about necessarily, which is not ideal in most cases. But typically, they're going to be looking at the things to maintain or sustain life.
It unfortunately a sad reality, but that's when it comes to life and property. That's how they look at life. They really are not going to be considered of cultural resources. As much as I like to be able to tell them, please do not disturb that, because you can never recreate that cultural resource again. Once it's destroyed, it is destroyed forever. Any other questions? Ma'am.
In the Southern Sierra Mountain Range, we work with U.S. Forest Service quite a bit, and I know they've been experiencing a lot of staff cuts and early retirements, and so we're losing our tribal liaisons or tribal representatives, and they usually would coordinate if a fire happened. They'd try to get ahead of the fire, and they would cover some of like the grinding stones and things with dirt. They'd be ahead of, like at least a few miles ahead of the fire to help out with protection of cultural sites. And now we don't have that, and then now you got to be certified and go through all this training. But then the training's not available now because of limited resources and you can't get it. So we're kind of in catch-22. So a lot of our folks are we're just going to get up in the front of the fire and do it ourselves.
No, it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. I mean, when you have key people, and that's one of the other items of emergency operations plans and emergency operations center, I lose about 25% of my people every couple of years. So I have to be training 25% of new people on the emergency operations plan about every 2 years. Training is very, very important. Meeting is very, very important. We also included the community members when we did our HAZMIT plan and our THERA plan. We included community members so they could give us input to that and to not only provide us input, but also to share with the community what we were planning and trying to do. Everything that Shasta's told you about their prep plan that they have here, we don't do everything she's got. We do a good portion of it, but I tell you, that's another very important thing for the community to know, because the Emergency Operations Center is going to be dealing with the actual emergency as it happens. Hopefully, people have been prepared to be able to deal with the emergency and also the recovery after the emergency. After the Emergency Operations Center is closed, basically, we're out of the picture, and it's really the community that's up to doing the recovery and to do the mitigation part of the emergency operations plans. Any other questions?
It's very important to have a pre-disaster relationship with all those elements locally. So, and that relationship would help you to get to access to the ICP or Incident Command Point or EOC, just to be in touch, receiving all those planning piece or information, just to be able to have a communication mechanism or venue to inform them of all your cultural resources or potential impacts to those.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because it keys something in my mind. We got a grant from FEMA to do a active shooter exercise, and the first was a tabletop. The second one was a get all the parties together, and the third one was an actual exercise. It was educational to me when we got everybody together to see how little people had learned from all the training we'd done with them, especially the outside entities. The sheriff department shows up and says, we're in charge. Our security department shows up and says, we're in charge. Our fire department showed up and said, we're in charge. Everybody was in charge to the point where nobody was in charge. And when that happens, you're definitely in a dangerous situation just for dealing with the emergency that's going on. So it's very important to even include those entities that might respond to it, to be able to know what your protocols are. Now, Viejas, where it's located, is right on Interstate 8. When we had that fire emergency operations center activation, the highway department showed up to our office first. Then the sheriff's department showed up. Obviously, our security department was already there and our fire department was already there, but they started showing up bit by bit. Luckily, the captain of the sheriff's department had gone through our training and he knew what the protocol was. Highway department, we'd never seen that person before. They came in, they were asking, where is the life-threatening situation? Well, it's a fire. We didn't have an active shooter, we didn't have any, but they responded as if we had an active life-threatening event going on. Obviously, the fire is life-threatening, but they thought we had somebody in the casino trying to shoot somebody. So they showed up even completely unprepared for what was going on. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa. And
Thank you for keeping it real, Ray.
Can I close this one? Oh my God, that's a terrible picture. Is it on this one? I don't know. There's a clicker. Okay. I wrote notes, so I wanted to look at my notes too. Okay. Hauka Memiyut Temenue, we Nachihi, Teresa Gregor, Matkopai, Elshquanan. I'm from the Ipai Nation of Santa Isabel. My name's Teresa. So Santa Isabel is one of the Northern Kumeyaay bands here in San Diego County. I'm still working for the Intertribal Long-Term Recovery Foundation. It is a nonprofit. We started in 2007 after the Pumacha fire, the Witch Creek fire. It was the third catastrophic firestorm that San Diego County had experienced in the early 2000s. We still exist, but this organization, the work that Shasta's done, the work that Ray has done, Paula, Palma, Viejas, Santa Isabel, La Jolla, who was 90% burned over and had a tremendous loss of homes. Luckily, no lives lost during that event. Mesa Grande, there were 9 tribes that formed this nonprofit. At the time, I was our tribal administrator, so Joe, I have been in your shoes. In your shoes when the entire county was evacuated, including our reservation. And when I reached for the emergency operation binder, it was empty. It was just tabs with things to put in it. And the council's calling me saying, what do we do? Where do we go? And I'm like, let me find out. And so that's when my disaster preparedness education started. And I got asked by tribal leadership to help coordinate some sort of a recovery organization, only because tribes are being left out of the recovery process, even though all of us had been evacuated. So what I know is from that early experience, helping tribes literally go from grassroots community organization, preparing, our individual tribal members to be resourceful, to do community emergency response training, as well as helping our tribes write their hazard mitigation plans. I think 3 tribes came to me and asked me to help them. Jamie had already written La Jolla's, and they are the only, I believe, the only tribe I know in the county that had a FEMA-approved pre-disaster mitigation plan, which helped obviously La Jolla, advance in their recovery. But I think they may have been the only one in the state, too. All the FEMA people I used to work with are gone in Cal OES, they've all moved on. So I remember thinking, why didn't we have these plans? Why was my EOP empty? And instead of laying blame, tribal administration is a beast. It's running a nation. It's not just running a city or government or small town or government. It's running a nation, and oftentimes there's only 5 or 6 people that are doing that job, and everybody's wearing a different hat. And some of those people are the elected officials, right? And they're expected to maintain these plans and do this work. So I learned really, really quickly what needed to be done, where the gaps were, and I saw what a huge task it was. So moving forward in sort of the work that I did, we started with grassroots. We were already in recovery, so it was sort of too late to kind of start with preparedness and mitigation because we were already in the aftermath. So we kind of got, the lesson first, the tests first and the lessons came later, right? So we were kind of behind the gun, helping our communities write their HMPs during that, like a 6-week window to get it in when a disaster is declared. So that was a beast, so that everybody who was impacted could then get recovery dollars to try to, rebuild, fix fences, replant, put people back in houses. Sorry, my slide's a little wonky. But for La Jolla, they served as such a good model for the region in terms of their environmental department, working with their first responders, working with their tribal government to plan ahead. So they became sort of the token child, and I still think of them in that way, in so many ways. Their recovery model far outpaced even the surrounding communities. Sorry, I'm getting a spam call. Communities like Rancho Bernardo, Ramona. When we would go to these VOAD meetings, which are voluntary organizations who are active in a disaster, so these are all the nonprofits that come out with resources to support your community, to bring you water, to bring you food, to bring clothes, to bring supplies for the youth, to help people kind of rebuild and restore their lives. When we would go to those meetings, they were so shocked that I would be there with Adam Geisler and Lavon Peck, who were from La Jolla, and Tracy Nelson, who was the chairperson at the time, I believe. And they said, why are you here? This is for the other communities. And we were like, we're a part of the community. And they said, well, don't the tribes have a different fund for you? Isn't the government going to do something different for you? So we had not only educating our councils and our community about how we were going to try to help them, but we were also educating all of our partners in the region about tribal sovereignty and jurisdiction and really what community means, right? So that was like the start of my work. At the time, nobody was talking about climate change, or very few people were talking about it in the conversations that we were having. It was sort of like, yeah, things are changing, they're getting hotter, but this is just, El Nino, and then now we're in a drought. But they weren't like totally connecting it in 03, 05, and 07. But now we know what's causing, right? A lot of the frequency of our disasters, the intensities. This is actually a flood picture from Kauai from that freak Valentine's Day storm that they had. I think it was like 5 years ago. And so I've helped do a lot of different interventions for tribes over the years. I've had a robust staff in our little nonprofit, and now it's pretty much down to me and my board, and then contractors and the people that I work with in this room. My day job is that I'm a professor at Cal State Long Beach, but this is my early morning day job and my late at night day job and like coming to conferences job. And one of the things that I promote is that we have to apply our traditional ecological knowledge. I used to just say like our native ways of knowing, like how we know and how we were taught, the way that our communities operate, right? The zone that Jamie implemented with Roy saved people's lives in La Jolla when the Pumacha fire hit. It was a windy day. There are already fires going around in the county and in Riverside. And that fire started in Pumacha in the nighttime. They were lucky that they had a fire chief from their community. Now he's the chairman, Wes Ruiz, who was also a chief in the Forest Service. So people got on their phones, told people to evacuate, and they got out of there by just like by the grace of Amaya. So that pre-planning did work in their instance, and the fact that the people knew their community, knew who to call, knew that somebody was going to answer because they were calling them or texting them and telling them where the fire was just really, really important. And that could be as simple as just like you're saying you're having problems here, get the head of the family, the elder, the auntie that does always come up, or the squeaky wheel from the tribal meeting and say, you would be great, because when you call them, people are gonna know you have something important to say, or maybe they think it's gossip, but whatever, they're gonna answer the phone, right? They're gonna answer the phone, and that's what we need to rely on. Like, how do we communicate in our communities? The training that I received early on came from FEMA, came from the Red Cross, but what I noticed immediately was that it wasn't tailored to our communities. FEMA, Cal OES have done amazing jobs adapting their preparedness, their recovery, just all of sort of the discipline to tribal needs, but that doesn't mean it's a one-to-one translation, right? We still have to just know who we are in terms of like our cultural values, what's important for us to protect on the lands that we still have, and we're fortunate that, we're gonna maybe keep them, and use that in all of our planning, right? Don't be afraid to put our language into the plans. I've worked with Sequan on their HMP, I've worked with Santa Isabel, I've worked with Palma, Rincon, San Pasqual, and I always say, if you're comfortable, if your fire chief or whoever's the main lead in helping to get the plan developed, if they're comfortable, bring in those cultural resource people that are gonna tell you the name of the mountain. The Pumacha fire, I kept saying, what does Pumacha mean? What does Pumacha mean? And people would just say, oh, go ask so-and-so. Well, it means on the back side of the mountain, the back side of the mountain. It has other significance in their cultural stories. It means a lot more than that, but that's what they told me. It's on the back of the mountain, and that made so much sense to me. And then I've been fortunate to know some of their singers, and they've said, well, actually it means this, and it is much deeper, and it is more significant. But I just said, if we can at least just say, like, this is a place name that matters to the people, right? And it matters that this was where the fire started. It matters that this is where a lot of the homes were burnt, and it matters that we need to rebuild this community. So that's how I've kind of like integrated things. Like I was saying, as far as TEK and IK, humans are responsible for a lot of our wildfires. But we can also use our indigenous knowledge, as we're seeing with people bringing back good fire to the land, to mitigate those risks, right? To teach our people a good way and a good use of fire. Again, I'm not gonna go into these. This is what I wanted to talk about. What will the blue sky look like after your storm passes, right? So what I try to do when people call me is, one, I tell them I'm very busy. And so if I'm gonna help you, I'm really just gonna be your facilitator and your transcriber to help you get your plan done, but we need a team to do it because people have to own the plan, right? Whoever that is in your manager positions, they need to be the ones that own it because they're the ones working in that community day after day. They're the ones that Ray's gonna call to say, hey, we have an incident. Are you taken care of? Please come in and help me, right? We need to switch our administrator roles in our communities that are so understaffed and so small to disaster service workers, because that's what happens in a city. That's what happens in these other townships. So I always ask, think of that sort of backward reverse engineering model. What tools and resources will you need to rebuild? Not just for the government to stay open, the continuity of government, that's a whole other plan that people need to have in place. Not only for your gas stations, for your casinos, for your enterprises, but for your schools, right? For your businesses and for your homeowners. A lot of tribes have blanket insurance policies or they have housing programs, but are they insured? And for me, one of the risks, this isn't necessarily climate totally in California because we are an earthquake country, but do you have earthquake insurance? The majority of tribal nations that I work with do not have earthquake insurance. It's an optional thing for their members to purchase. They have fire insurance. They might have some flood insurance, but getting earthquake insurance is huge, I think, for our communities. I always look up this quote because I think it's also very valuable to think about in recovery. For every dollar you invest in preparedness, there's a $13 today, because we know inflation, $13 cost savings in recovery. When I started, it was $4 in savings. So this is only going to increase, right? It's not going to lessen. And then I think Rob addressed this, that life after disasters become so much harder for people. Our communities are already, we have so many other like socioeconomic health impacts that make our communities vulnerable. So when we have a disaster, this just amplifies, right? What's kind of like not going right in our communities. And so the key for me in recovery is how do we get people to their new normal? It's never gonna be whole again, not quite, but as tribal communities, because most of our membership will stay where they're at, they will expect to get help to rebuild their lives. And that's what we owe them, right? This is the last of our territory, our reservation lands. What is it gonna take for us to help them rebuild? What is it gonna take for us to help them have temporary shelter, regain their employment? All of those things are questions that need to be considered. So for me, I would just echo what Ray said, that all of this takes time, so get started now. Use a team approach. I think that's the most effective because you get that buy-in, not only from administration and leadership, but from the community, from the elders, but plan on like a 3-hour good lunch conversation with the elders because they will all start telling you their stories. And those are important to have in the record about what they remember and what they've seen change, right? Our elders and our youth are our most vulnerable parts of our population. The elders because they carry all of our wisdom, and the youth because they're our future. Let's see, what else did I put on here? Disasters see no borders. I've also tried to help Paula Fire quite a bit with some of their messaging. I've said, I have this vision for you, and all the tribes that have casinos is like all these QR codes around. So you're tailoring your message for people who are visiting your enterprise or like your racetrack. Like this is an evacuation route you can have, or like a link to your plan. Like this is where you need to go for your workers, right? And the government side of the house, for the schools or whatever you are, but tailor the messaging and link them to resources and then show them, keep telling them where that messaging is at so that people can have it, on their smartphones. Something else I didn't hear, but maybe you talked about it earlier as far as recovery, is for people that are gonna help with debris removal, to get that HAZWOPER training, that 40-hour training especially, and then adding in that cultural component. So if you do see things that have been disturbed by a bulldozer going through. You have people on site that can record it. I know Middletown Rancheria actually had photographs of what a site might look like and gave it to their people that were out there in the field doing the recovery and walking the line so they could tag and document anything that needed to be recovered and reburied. The PSPS is not, well, it is climate related and it's not totally a disaster. It's meant to prevent disasters, but the preparedness that we're taught is 3 days. 3 days, be ready to shelter in place for 3 days. But in January and December, some of our communities had 5, 7, and 9 days without power in East County. So that goes beyond the guidelines. And so how are we getting them to prepare, right? So we need to have like another conversation about that. And I have been working with SDG&E and those tribes to do that, to pre-stage and have more resources available. Let's see, I'm gonna wrap up. I was just making sure I covered all my notes. Oh, just the education piece is key and critical. Education, education, education is like constantly the cycle and the circle. I see this in all areas of tribal life. Administrations change, people leave their jobs and agencies, and then a new person comes in and we have to start all over again. The same thing happens in our tribal governments. The one thing that remains the same is the land. And so the land and nature is gonna do what they're gonna do. So as long as we're thinking about just how to continue that cycle and make sure people are getting your message, I think that the recovery is possible. But again, we have to just really think far-reaching and start today. So if you know like your number one gap is like, you can't get to somebody's house or certain houses on your lands, like start thinking about evacuation routes and how to improve their road and how to get them the resources they would need to survive something, I think. So sorry, I went a little off script because, but yeah, there's resources. Questions, comments?
Questions?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if it's more of a question, it's just a experience. My father lived in Canyon Dam, just south of Lake Almanor, and his whole town, they're just right above Greenville. They got wiped out with the Dixie Fire. But, it was like in the month of August when that happened, and I just happened to be at his place in April because he was suffering with dementia for the elderly, so his neighbors were concerned. So I actually just happened to take pictures of inside his house, around his house. I don't know why, but it helped when the fire thing happened. FEMA needs to have all the pictures, all kind of things. So take pictures of your community, take pictures of your houses, what you own, interior, exterior. It's really important for wildfires to have that information.